The old market had been standing for decades, its cracked stone pathways polished smooth by millions of hurried footsteps. Vendors shouted prices, metal trays clanged, and the smell of spices, fried bread, and dust mixed in the warm afternoon air. To most people, it was just another noisy place to bargain and move on. To Amina, it felt like the hardest walk of her life. She stood at the edge of a small jewelry stall, her hands hidden beneath the sleeves of her worn shawl. Inside her pocket was a velvet pouch, faded green, its fabric thin from years of careful handling. She had taken it out countless times before, usually late at night, when the children were asleep and the room was quiet enough for memories to speak. Today, she wished she hadn't brought it at all. The shopkeeper looked up, barely interested. He had seen desperation before. It always came dressed the same way, lowered eyes, stiff shoulders, silent pleading. Amina swallowed and placed the pouch on the counter. The sound it made was soft, almost apologetic. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "I need to sell this." The shopkeeper opened the pouch and lifted the gold locket into the light. It wasn't large, but it was finely crafted, its surface etched with tiny floral patterns worn smooth by time. He tested its weight in his palm, already calculating how little he could offer. "This is old," he muttered. "Gold isn't pure. I'll give you enough for a meal. Take it or leave it." Amina's fingers tightened. The locket had once rested against her mother's heart. She remembered being a child, tracing the designs with curious hands while her mother smiled and said, "Some things are worth more than money." The memory stung like salt on an open wound. But hunger was louder than memory. She nodded. "That's fine." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow, surprised she didn't argue. He counted out a few worn bills and slid them across the counter. Amina didn't look at the money. She closed her fingers around it, feeling its thinness, and pulled her hand back as if afraid it might disappear. Across the street, behind the tinted glass of a black luxury car, Daniel Hale sat reviewing messages on his phone. His driver waited patiently. The market was not on Daniel's schedule, he was only passing through. Deals worth millions usually demanded his attention, not dusty stalls and broken stones. Then, through the window, he noticed her. It wasn't what she wore or what she sold, it was how she stood. Straight-backed, calm, as if she were choosing loss rather than surrendering to it. Daniel found himself lowering his phone, his eyes following as she took the money and gently pushed the velvet pouch back toward the shopkeeper. "Thank you," she said quietly. She turned to leave, pausing for a brief moment. Her hand hovered over the counter, as if part of her wanted to reach back. Then she pulled away and walked into the crowd. Daniel opened the car door without realizing he had decided to do so. The noise of the market hit him instantly, loud and alive. He watched Amina disappear between vendors, the sun catching her hair, the set of her shoulders telling a story he couldn't hear, but somehow understood. Something about that exchange felt wrong. Not illegal, not dramatic, just deeply human. Daniel had seen desperation before, people begging for jobs, favors, signatures. But this was different. She hadn't begged, she had chosen, and in that choice, she had given up something irreplaceable. As he stood there, the shopkeeper slipped the locket into a drawer, already forgetting the woman who had owned it. Daniel, however, couldn't forget her face. And without knowing why, he felt certain of one thing. What she had just sold was far more valuable than gold. Daniel didn't mean to follow her. At least, that's what he told himself as he kept a careful distance, blending awkwardly into the flow of the market. His tailored suit felt out of place among worn coats and faded shawls, yet no one paid him much attention. Everyone was busy surviving their own small battles. Amina moved with quiet purpose. She didn't stop to look at clothes or trinkets. She didn't hesitate or bargain. Daniel noticed how tightly she held the small bundle of cash, as if even a second of carelessness might steal it from her. When she reached a modest bakery, she paused only long enough to glance at the prices before stepping inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. Daniel waited outside, pretending to examine his phone through the glass. He watched as she spoke to the baker, pointing instead of speaking too much. A few minutes later, she emerged with a paper bag tucked against her chest. The smell of fresh bread drifted into the street. She didn't smile, but there was relief in her eyes. Amina walked several blocks, away from the livelier parts of the market, until the buildings grew older and quieter. Paint peeled from walls, and windows were patched with cardboard. She stopped in front of a narrow building with a crooked door and climbed the stairs without slowing. Daniel hesitated. Following her further felt like crossing an invisible line. Yet something deeper than curiosity pulled him forward. He waited, watching the cracked doorway from across the street. Moments later, the door opened from inside. Two children ran toward Amina, their voices bright with excitement. "You brought bread," one of them said, clutching at the bag. Amina knelt, smoothing their hair, dividing the food carefully, bread first, then milk, then a single apple cut cleanly in half. She made sure they ate before she even touched a crumb. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. She had sold her only treasure, not for herself, but for them. He turned away before she could notice him, his thoughts louder than the market had been. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The image of the locket, the children, and Amina's steady eyes followed him into the dark. The next morning, he returned to the market alone. The shopkeeper recognized him instantly, his posture changing the moment Daniel approached. Wealth announced itself without words. "I'd like to buy something you took in yesterday," Daniel said calmly. The shopkeeper opened a drawer and pulled out the velvet pouch. "Fine piece," he said, suddenly enthusiastic. "Rare workmanship." Daniel didn't reply. He opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph, yellowed at the edges. A young woman smiled into the camera, her expression warm, familiar in a way that made Daniel's breath catch. Beneath the photo was a small engraving, barely visible. Daniel's hands trembled. He knew that face. Years ago, during a factory collapse, a woman had dragged him from beneath falling debris before disappearing into the chaos. He had survived because of her. He had searched for her afterward, offering rewards, donations, anything, but she was never found. The name engraved inside the locket was hers. Daniel closed the locket slowly. The noise of the market faded, replaced by the echo of a past he thought was lost forever. Amina wasn't just a stranger struggling to survive. She was the daughter of the woman who had saved his life. The shopkeeper cleared his throat, naming a price far higher than before. Daniel paid without hesitation. As he stepped back into the sunlight, the locket warm in his palm, Daniel understood the weight of what he held. It wasn't gold that stunned him. It was fate, quiet, patient, and impossible to ignore. The market was quieter that morning, as if it, too, was catching its breath. Stalls were just opening, metal shutters lifting with tired groans. Amina walked the familiar path with measured steps, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. She hadn't planned to return so soon, but something inside her felt unfinished, like a sentence cut short. She paused near the same jewelry stall, her eyes avoiding it. The space on her chest felt strangely empty, lighter yet heavier at the same time. She told herself it was foolish to look back. What was done was done. Food had been bought. The children had slept with full stomachs for the first time in days. That was supposed to be enough. A soft engine sound broke the morning stillness. A black car rolled to a stop nearby, polished and out of place among the cracked stones and wooden carts. Amina barely glanced at it at first. Cars like that belonged to another world, one that didn't notice people like her. The door opened. Daniel stepped out, holding a small velvet pouch in his hand. Amina felt her breath catch before she understood why. "Excuse me," he said gently, keeping his distance. His voice carried none of the sharpness she expected from men in fine suits. "I believe this belongs to you." He extended the pouch. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her fingers trembled as she took it, the familiar texture sending a wave of memories through her chest. When she opened it and saw the locket resting inside, the world seemed to tilt. I sold this," she whispered, confused. "You shouldn't have it." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't lose it," he said. "You sacrificed it." Tears blurred her vision before she could stop them. She clutched the locket as if it might vanish again. "It was my mother's," she said softly. "It's all I had left of her." "I know," Daniel replied. Her eyes lifted, startled. He told her then. Not loudly, not dramatically, about the factory accident, the woman who pulled him from the wreckage, the face he had never forgotten. As he spoke, Amina's tears fell freely. She recognized the story. Her mother had once come home bruised and exhausted, saying only, "I helped someone today." That was enough. "You saved my life," Daniel said. "Or rather, she did. And you honored her by choosing others over yourself." Amina shook her head slowly. "I didn't have a choice." Daniel met her gaze. "You did. And you chose love." He reached into his coat and offered her an envelope, thick but unmarked. She tried to refuse, stepping back, but he raised a hand. "This isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's responsibility." Inside was more money than Amina had ever held, but Daniel went further. He spoke of a small apartment near a school, of education for the children, of a job, honest work, with fair pay and dignity. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to be part of your future." Amina pressed the locket to her chest, feeling its warmth return. For the first time in a long while, the weight she carried began to lift, not because her past was erased, but because it was finally seen. As she walked away, the morning sun caught the gold at her neck, and Daniel stood watching her go. He had spent his life chasing success, measuring value in numbers and signatures. That day, in a quiet market, he learned the true cost and power of sacrifice. And it changed him forever.